Have you ever felt called to step out of your comfort zone, to brave the unknown, even when it seemed impossible? This is God's call for this generation, a call to stop looking and start walking. Let's take a moment to reflect on an ancient story that speaks to this call. It's about a man named Peter, a simple fisherman who had the audacity to step out of his boat and walk on water towards Jesus. Now, imagine the scene. The sea was stormy, the night was dark, and the boat, it was the only safe haven. Yet Peter, fueled by faith and courage, chose to step out into the unknown. He dared to walk on the winds and the waves, trusting in the voice of the one he believed to be his Lord. Sometimes, like Peter, we need to trust and step into the uncharted territories, even when we can't see the way clear. Can you recall a time when you felt called to act, but fear held you back? It's a common experience, isn't it? We stay in our comfort zones, anchored by the familiar, even when the winds of change are blowing all around us. This is where faith comes into play. Consider the biblical story of Peter. He had the courage to step out of the boat during a storm, believing it was Jesus calling him onto the water. This was no small feat. Peter was a seasoned fisherman. He understood boats, he knew the sea. But stepping out onto the water, that was completely uncharted territory. Yet he dared to do it, trusting in the voice he believed to be Jesus. He stepped out in faith, not knowing what lay ahead. That's the essence of faith, isn't it? Trusting when we can't see the end of the road, stepping forward when we don't know what's around the corner. But here's where it gets interesting. As Peter was walking on the water, he took his eyes off Jesus. He began to focus on the storm, the waves, the uncertainty. And what happened? He began to sink. This is a powerful lesson for us. When we fix our eyes on the challenges, the obstacles, the fears, we lose sight of Jesus. We begin to sink in our doubts and fears. But the story doesn't end there. Even as Peter was sinking, he cried out to Jesus, who immediately reached out his hand and caught him. What does this tell us? That even when we falter, when our faith wavers, Jesus is there, ready to catch us, to pull us back up. So, like Peter, we must learn to keep our focus on Jesus, regardless of the storms around us. We must trust his word, stepping out in faith, even when we can't see the path ahead. Faith isn't about seeing, it's about believing. It's about trusting in his word, even when the circumstances seem impossible. We must remember, like Peter, to keep our focus on Jesus, regardless of the storms around us. What are the winds and waves in your life that distract you from walking towards your calling? We all have our own storms, our own winds and waves that seem to toss us about, threatening to pull us under. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the tumultuous sea of life, to focus on the crashing waves, the howling winds, the looming clouds. But let's think back to Peter. He was in the midst of a storm, a real, tangible storm. And yet, his focus wasn't on the storm, but rather on a figure walking on water, Jesus. Peter had the courage to step out of the boat, to venture into the unknown, to walk on water. That's faith. But then, something happened. Peter looked around. He saw the wind, the waves, the storm. And he started to sink. Why? He took his eyes off Jesus. He stopped walking in faith and started looking at his circumstances. How often do we do the same? How often do we let the winds and waves of life distract us from our calling? How often do we start sinking because we're too focused on the storm instead of the one who can calm it? It's time for a change. It's time to stop looking at the distractions, the fears, the uncertainties. It's time to start walking towards Jesus, our guide, our strength, our Savior. The road won't always be easy. There will be storms. There will be challenges. There will be times when we feel like we're sinking. But remember, Jesus is there with us every step of the way. It's not about what we see around us. It's about who we're walking towards. It's about placing our trust in Jesus, even when the winds are howling and the waves are crashing. So let's take a step. Let's take a leap of faith. Let's stop looking and start walking. We must keep walking towards Jesus, no matter what storms we face. Remember, he is the author and finisher of our faith. So stop looking and start walking.